Assalamu alaikum, I'm Marwa Adil Ahmed. This is the third lecture about female reproductive physiology. In this lecture, we'll talk about menstrual cycle. Learning objectives: to identify primary hormones that regulate ovarian and uterine cycles, to describe characteristic changes occur during phases of uterine and ovarian cycles, explain how the cycle prepares the body for potential pregnancy, recognize signs of normal and abnormal menstrual cycle. The physiology of menstrual cycle. Menstruation is an external manifestation of normal menstrual cycle which is expressed in regular vaginal bleeding. Menstruation occurs as a result of shedding of endometrial or uterine line following failure of fertilization of oocytes at that menstrual cycle. The cycle depends on change occur after puberty within ovaries and fluctuation in ovarian hormone levels, estrogen and progesterone, which are themselves controlled by pituitary and hypothalamus within hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. During childhood, ovary is inactive. After puberty, when hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis mature and ovary start osteogenesis, these hormones secreted by ovary responsible for these changes occur during menstrual cycle, ovarian and uterine cycle. To explain hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, we'll talk about hypothalamus first. Hypothalamus in the forebrain, which is responsible for many critical functions in the body, example, thirst and sleep cycle, thermoregulatory center, also sex drive and emotional responses. In this lecture, we'll highlight its role in controlling pituitary and subsequent reproductive function. So, hypothalamus secrete peptide hormone, gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which in turn control or stimulate pituitary hormone secretion to secrete gonadotropins. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone must be released in a pulsatile fashion to stimulate pituitary to secrete gonadotropins, which stand for luteinizing hormone LH and follicle stimulating hormone FSH. Pituitary gland, which is stimulated by gonadotropin-releasing hormone, as we say, stimulate basophil cells in anterior pituitary gland. Pituitary gland divided into anterior and posterior pituitary gland. What gonadotropins released from anterior pituitary gland? The pituitary gland controlled from hypothalamus through gonadotropin-releasing hormone and also controlled by ovarian hormones through feedback system, which is a part of hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. The ovarian response to pituitary hormones is driven by gonadotropins, FSH and LH, which regulate follicle development, folliculogenesis, steroidogenesis, and ovulation. The pituitary hormone fluctuates during 28 days of menstrual cycle. If we suppose the average length of menstrual cycle from 21 to 35 days. So we'll talk about 28 days menstrual cycle as an average of that range. So the pituitary hormones fluctuate during these 28 days, driving changes in the ovary that alternate between dominant estrogen production as the first half of menstrual cycle, mainly follicular phase, and dominant progesterone production as the second half of menstrual cycle. And so pituitary hormones and subsequent ovarian hormones will fluctuate during menstrual cycle, not follow the same rhythm throughout the cycle. Ovarian steroidogenesis is the process of secreting sex steroid hormones from the ovarian follicle using substrate cholesterol, which is regulated by gonadotropins released from anterior pituitary gland. Luteinizing hormone drives the conversion of cholesterol to androgen by the theca layer. We talk about ovarian follicle in the first lecture and we discuss its structure. The ovarian follicle consists of oocytes surrounded by granulosa cell layer and theca cell layers. The theca cell layers, which is stimulated by luteinizing hormone to convert cholesterol into androgen. The androgen will be transported into granulosa cell layers to be converted into estrogen catalyzed by enzyme aromatase. This is called aromatization. As the thicker cell layer lacks this aromatase enzyme, so the conversion from androgen into estrogen will only be occurred in granulosa cell under influence of follicle stimulating hormone. Both cells, thick and granulosa cells, can convert cholesterol into progesterone. This is called two-cell two-gonadotrophin theory. The two cells are thick and granular cells, while two gonadotrophins, FSH and LH. As we say, the pituitary gland controlled from hypothalamus and from the ovary by ovarian pituitary feedback loop as a part of HPO axis, hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. This feedback loop regulates menstrual cycle through hormonal signaling, in which FSH initiates follicular growth and estradiol production, while LH triggers ovulation and form corpus luteum of the remaining thick and granulosa cell of that follicle. The corpus luteum in turn will produce progesterone hormone. So, estradiol produced and progesterone produced will regulate ovarian pituitary feedback loop. In a feedback mechanism, negative feedback, the growing follicle in that cycle produces estrogen and progesterone in a level enough to inhibit pituitary hormones or prevent further follicular development. During positive feedback, which is occur before ovulation, high level of estrogen act positively on the pituitary to stimulate massive LH surge required for ovulation. The estrogen has biphasic effect on pituitary. During the most of the cycle, it has negative feedback inhibitory effect on the pituitary when the estrogen level is in low or moderate concentration. But at the mid-cycle, during ovulatory phase, there is a massive or high concentration of estrogen which is trigger positive feedback on luteinizing hormone secretion. This LH surge occurred responsible for ovulation of that oocyte in this menstrual cycle. This diagram represents negative and positive feedback in ovarian pituitary feedback loop. This hypothalamus, which secretes gonadotrophin releasing hormone, stimulate pituitary and anterior pituitary gland mainly to secrete luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. These called gonadotrophins. Gonadotrophins stimulate ovary to secrete sex steroid hormones in a form of estradiol, inhibin A and inhibin B, and progesterone. During most of the cycle, these hormones secreted by ovary will inhibit hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, while at the middle of the cycle, the estradiol concentration will be high concentration, can able to trigger LH surge, which is responsible for ovulation. So, this is hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, including ovarian pituitary feedback loop. Inhibin is a protein hormone secreted by granulosa cell, inhibits the secretion of FSH from anterior pituitary. It acts as a negative feedback mechanism to regulate oogenesis and ovulation in female. As we say, estradiol has biphasic effect on luteinizing hormone production depending on its concentration and timing during menstrual cycle. In low and moderate concentration, it acts as negative feedback, but during mid-cycle, there is a high concentration of estrogen, which is trigger luteinizing hormone surge, responsible for ovulation. Ovarian response to pituitary hormone starts at puberty. Before puberty, during childhood, ovary is inactive and not stimulated by gonadotrophins. As we explained in first lecture, the primordial follicles containing oocytes will start to activate and grow in cyclical fashion, causing ovulation and formation of corpus luteum. During folliculogenesis, these primordial follicles will develop and grow into Graafian pre-ovulatory follicle. This is called follicular phase. When reach that size of dominant Graafian follicle, it's ready for ovulation. Ovulation occurs in response to luteinizing hormone surge, which occurs at the mid-cycle around day 14 in 28-day menstrual cycle. At ovulation, Graafian follicle will secrete secondary oocyte, and the remaining follicular cells that surround the oocyte will remain in the ovary. Will form what we call corpus luteum. This is called luteal phase. It represents the second half of menstrual cycle. This corpus luteum is responsible for production of progesterone mainly and some estradiol, which is act to prepare for implantation. If fertilization occurs in the cycle, if no pregnancy occurs, the corpus luteum will degenerate, causing progesterone and estradiol level to fall. This drop in progesterone and estradiol level will remove the negative feedback on the pituitary and will allow the production of gonadotropins, mainly follicle stimulating hormone, to start a new cycle. In the course of normal menstrual cycle, the ovary will go through 3 phases: follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and luteal. Follicular as the first half, ovulatory as the mid-cycle, and luteal the second half of menstrual cycle. In ovarian cycle, there is 3 phases: follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and luteal phase. Follicular phase corresponds for first half of menstrual cycle. Ovulatory phase occurs during around day 14. Luteal phase at the second half of menstrual cycle in 28-day menstrual cycle, as we suppose. During follicular phase, there is folliculogenesis. Folliculogenesis is a developmental process from primordial follicle into Graafian pre-ovulatory follicle under the influence of FSH. Okay? Around day 14, due to luteinizing hormone surge, there is ovulation of that follicle to release secondary oocyte. This is the secondary oocyte released, and the follicular cell will remain in the ovary, which consists of theca cells and granulosa cell. This released oocyte will be ready to be fertilized later, while the remaining follicular cells in the ovary will form corpus luteum. Corpus luteum will be responsible for production of progesterone mainly and some estradiol during the second half of menstrual cycle. This is called luteal phase. Luteal phase usually 14 days without great variation. During follicular phase, under the effect of follicle stimulating hormone, the predominant hormone is estrogen. While during luteal phase, under the effect of luteinizing hormone, corpus luteum will produce progesterone mainly as the second half of menstrual cycle. So estrogen and FSH as the first half of cycle, while LH and progesterone as the second half of the cycle. During follicular development, start with follicular recruitment. Group of antral follicles recruited to grow in response to follicle stimulating hormone during early follicular phase. As we say, the first half of menstrual cycle, there is a follicular phase in which follicle stimulating hormone stimulate growth of antral follicles and secrete estrogen, followed by follicular selection. Only one follicle will be selected from a group of antral follicles that recruited to create a dominant follicle. This selected follicle will grow rapidly, produce high level of estrogen and inhibin to suppress follicle stimulating hormone via negative feedback. The drop in follicle stimulating hormone will result in atresia of other recruited antral follicles, and one follicle will dominate to be ready for ovulation at that cycle. Regarding ovulation, the dominant follicle rupture to release secondary oocyte driven by LH or luteinizing hormone surge. This occurs as a mid-cycle. As the follicle mature and release high concentration of estrogen, This high level of estrogen will act on anterior pituitary via positive feedback to secrete luteinizing hormone. This luteinizing hormone secreted will form luteinization of the granulosa cell to create subsequent corpus luteum. This luteinizing hormone surge will stimulate completion of meiosis 1 in the oocyte prior to its release. Ovulation per se, or physical ovulation, occur after breakdown of the follicular wall under the influence of luteinizing hormone surge and proteolytic enzymes. Example of these enzymes is plasminogen activators and prostaglandin. So, drugs affect plasminogen activators activity or prostaglandin production can affect also ovulation, can inhibit ovulation, causing luteinizing and ruptured follicle syndrome. After ovulation or release of the oocyte, the remaining granulosa and theca cell on the ovary follicular cells can form corpus luteum. It's a Latin terminology, stands for yellow body, which is a temporary endocrine structure, primarily release progesterone and some estrogen. Progesterone levels are at their highest concentration in the second half of the cycle during luteal phase, which is responsible for preparing endometrium for implantation by thickening of endometrium for potential pregnancy. The luteal phase lasts for 14 days in most of women without great variation. Assuming pregnancy didn't occur, the cell of corpus luteum will regress and break down by luteolysis, forming what we call corpus albicans or white body. By luteolysis of corpus luteum, the progesterone hormone will drop and causing shedding of that endometrium and subsequent menstruation. This picture demonstrates the ovarian cycle in their three phases. Primordial or primary follicle will grow in follicular phase up to Graafian follicle, which is ready for ovulation. During ovulatory phase, under influence of LH, there is release of secondary oocyte, and the remaining theca and granulosa cell will form corpus luteum. Corpus luteum starts the luteal phase and secrete progesterone throughout to prepare the endometrium. If pregnancy not occur, this corpus luteum will degenerate, causing corpus albicans, and drop of progesterone will form shedding of endometrial lining in uterine cycle, which will be explained in next slides. This diagram summarizes hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, ovarian cycle, and uterine cycle. As we suppose 28 days of menstrual cycle, the anterior pituitary will secrete gonadotrophins, FSH at the first half of menstrual cycle, and luteinizing hormone at the mid-cycle for ovulation. Regarding ovarian cycle, the first half for folliculogenesis and mid-cycle for ovulatory phase, followed by luteal phase at the second half of menstrual cycle. Estrogen and inhibin secreted during follicular phase under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone from granulosa cell, while during the luteal phase or the second half of menstrual cycle, the predominant hormone is progesterone. Regarding uterine cycle, it's contained of menstrual phase, proliferative phase, and secretory phase. During the first half of menstrual cycle, there is menstrual and proliferative phase, while secretory phase during the second half of menstrual cycle correspond for luteal phase. Starting with proliferative phase, in which endometrium proliferate and glandular stromal growth occur, the epithelium lining of the endometrial gland will change from single layer to pseudostratified epithelium by mitosis, with subsequent increase in endometrial thickness from 0.5 mm after menstruation and shedding of endometrial lining to 5 mm at the end of proliferative phase. The end of proliferative phase is correspond for ovulation or ovulatory phase of ovarian cycle, followed by secretory phase, which is occur after ovulation, and the second half, which is correspond for luteal phase. Okay. During secretory phase, there is a period of endometrial glandular secretory activity. So, following estrogen-induced proliferative phase, the endometrial gland will become tertious, spiral arteries grow by progesterone from corpus luteum. This endometrial gland will secrete glycogen-rich fluid to support possible implantation. If pregnancy not occur at that cycle, menstruation, which is occur at day 1 of uterine cycle, will take place. Involve shedding of endometrium and vaginal bleeding, which is last for 3 to 7 days, the first 7 days of menstrual cycle. The average vaginal loss around 30 to 80 ml. This is the normal average of menstrual cycle days and amount. Abnormalities of menstruation. First, start with amenorrhea. Amenorrhea is absence of menstruation, either primary or secondary. Primary amenorrhea is the absence of first menstrual cycle at menarche. Secondary amenorrhea is the absence of menstrual cycle in a female has previous regular cycles. The second abnormality is menorrhagia or heavy menstrual bleeding. The heavy menstrual bleeding defined as either heavy menstruation, more than 80 ml of blood, or prolonged in days, more than 7 days. Polymenorrhagia is a cycle that occurs too frequently in interval shorter than 21 days. As we say, the normal average menstrual cycle from 21 to 35 days. If menstrual cycle occurs frequently in less than 21 days interval, it's called polymenorrhagia. While oligomenorrhea is infrequent periods that occur in more than 35 days apart. Dysmenorrhea is menstruation associated with severe pain. Lastly, metrorrhagia, which is the bleeding occur in between regular period or intermenstrual bleeding. This is briefly clue about menstrual cycle and its abnormalities. Thank you.